Resolving Jewish misconceptions of Yeshua and or the Christian faith. Let's first look at what preconceived misconceptions are. Preconceived misconceptions are quick judgments based on lack of knowledge due to mindsets that have been molded by the environment a person has been subjected to. Misconceptions result when a person blindly follows what they have been taught, have been influenced by, and fail to use right reasoning to make a difference between what is truth and what is error. The first misconception we shall look at is, Jesus cannot be the Messiah because more Jewish blood has been shed in his name than in any other name. This objection is rooted in church history because Jews suffered terrible things at the hands of the so-called Christian church. Now, in resolving such a misconception, one must ask the following questions. Firstly, who were these so-called professing Christians who shed Jewish blood, and why did they do it? Now, people know that there are both genuine and fake items sold on the market. For example, there are genuine Chanel perfumes and there are fake ones. Likewise, the same reasoning should be applied and understood that there are both genuine and fake people in religion. The enlightened versus the deluded, and the genuine versus those that use religion to achieve their own ends, rooted in selfishness, ambition, greed, ignorance, or whatever. Any person who is deluded or misled and is placed in a position of power or authority is dangerous. And it is wrong to accuse of faith on the basis of some people who in their delusion and wickedness abuse their authority in the wrong way. So how does one make a right distinction? Firstly, by knowing what the scriptures of a faith teach, and secondly, if a person is living up to those scriptures. The Christian Gospels teach to love your enemies, to do good to those that persecute you, to turn the other cheek, and to repay evil with good. So the so-called church that shed Jewish blood during history in the likes of the Crusades, the Inquisition, the Holocaust, etc., could not have been the genuine God-fearing church, because their actions were a complete denial of what Yeshua taught. Just like the small group of self-righteous Jewish religious leaders that were responsible for coercing Pilate to kill Yeshua don't represent the entire Jewish people, likewise, the so-called Christians involved in these atrocities do not represent all Christians. Understand also that just because a person is born or raised in a certain country, this does not make that person a genuine adherent of that country's faith. There are people in all faiths who go to church, synagogues, temples, and they even follow traditions, but their speech and their actions reflect the contrary. And people's disobedience to God does not nullify who God is and what He requires from people. Wicked so-called Christians do not nullify Yeshua and His words any more than the wicked kings of ancient Israel and Judah nullify the Torah and the prophets. The medieval times was also a time of great ignorance, and the Bible was not available to common people during this time. Many of those involved in the atrocities against Jews had not even read the Bible, and they had no connection whatsoever to the teachings of Yeshua. Jews have to understand that genuine Christians or followers of Yeshua love the Jewish people, and they are for them because they acknowledge that the blessings that they have are from the Jewish people. It is the genuine Christians that are the friends of Israel, and history is filled with Christians who risk their lives to save the Jewish people from such atrocities. And before we continue, here is a list of a few examples of Christians that risked their lives for the Jews. If Christianity were a violent religion against Jews, then why don't you see Christians going around killing Jews today, especially since Christianity has grown on a worldwide scale? The fact of the matter is that it is always the followers of Yeshua who are being persecuted. In the first century, it was the Jewish followers of Yeshua who were being persecuted by their fellow Jews. In medieval times, the Christian pioneers who wanted to translate the Bible into English in the 14th, 15th, and 16th centuries were the ones who were being persecuted and even killed by the so-called church of that day for wanting to put the Bible into the language of the people. Even today, true Christians are persecuted worldwide, and in Israel it's the ultra-Orthodox Jews that persecute the Messianic Jews and not the other way around. It is important to very briefly look at how anti-Semitism crept into the church. After the crucifixion of Yeshua, the death of the Apostle James in about 62 AD led to a dispersing of Jewish believers from Jerusalem and the weakening of the Jewish Christian community. The destruction of the temple by the Romans in 70 AD, with the consequent end of the Levitical priesthood and sacrificial system, brought a virtual close to the Jewish religion. The slaughter of the Jews by the Romans under the leadership of Titus and Adrian caused many Christians to flee Jerusalem and become dispersed, moving out more and more beyond Israel. Many Gentile believers fled Jerusalem and went to Pella, which is about 60 miles northeast of Jerusalem. This had started the physical separation of Gentile and Jewish followers of Yeshua, and instead of Jerusalem, the church's new leadership came from its other centers in Antioch, Alexandria, and eventually Rome, which were all Gentile cities. Christians saw the disasters that hit Jerusalem and the Jewish people as God's judgment upon their unbelieving response to God's anointed Jesus Christ, reinforcing their claim that they had become the new Israel. So by the 2nd century AD, the evolving doctrine of replacement theology had started to infiltrate the thinking of the early church. This theology taught that God is completely done with Israel and that the Christian church is its complete replacement regarding the plan, purpose, and promises of God. This meant that many of the promises that God made to Israel had to be spiritualized to refer to the church. Now, the Gentile church probably did not seek to understand the Jewish roots of the faith as it should have, either because the scriptures weren't so readily available, or because having now been also accepted into the covenant, they may have felt they had need of nothing else. This, together with the physical separation and the rise in Hellenism, contributed to the infiltration of Greek philosophical ideas which were unbiblical. So Hellenistic Christians who had fled Jerusalem were being influenced by the Greeks to blame not Rome, but the Jewish people for the death of Yeshua by early church fathers, such as Chrysostom, who labeled the Jews as the Christ killers. Replacement theology and this thinking is completely unbiblical, and in the book of Romans, chapter 11, verses 25 to 26, Paul warned about this ignorance that would lead to the arrogance and conceit of the Gentiles. He says, "I do not want you to be ignorant of this mystery, brothers and sisters, so that you may not be conceited. Israel has experienced a hardening in part until the full number of the Gentiles has come in, and in this way all Israel will be saved. As it is written, the deliverer will come from Zion. He will turn godlessness away from Jacob." Scriptures like Matthew chapter 19 verse 28 and Romans chapter 11 verses 17 to 21 also refute this erroneous theology. The permanent separation of Jew and Gentile believers occurred in one day when Constantine signed the Edict of Milan in 313 AD, which officially recognized Christianity as the state religion, in this way taking control away from God and enforcing Christian faith by earthly methods. As the Gentile-dominated church gained political power, it began to require Jews who accepted Yeshua as Messiah to give up ties with Judaism. Constantine's influence sanctioned the moves away from the roots of Christianity. He called the Council of Nicaea in 325 AD, which fixed the dates of holy days by the secular or pagan calendar rather than the Jewish calendar. And this detached the events in Jesus' ministry from their prophetic Jewish context, depriving the church of deep insight into God and His designs. The Roman Catholic Church grew in power until it ruled most of the known world and plunged the world into the Dark Ages. With this came the various and horrific persecution of Jews, such as the Crusades, which were military campaigns of the Roman Catholic Church to gain control of Jerusalem from the Muslims and to punish the Jews as the alleged Christ killers on the road to and from Jerusalem. The Crusaders that were misguided were in it for their own ends and acting on their own prejudices by force of arms. They were thieves, robbers and murderers whose sins had been forgiven by the Pope in advance of the crusade. Any warrior who answered the Pope's call of the crusade could consider all his financial debts to any Jewish creditor cancelled, which reduced many Jewish communities to poverty. The Spanish Inquisition from AD 1478 till 1808 aimed at taking away the property of wealthy Jews and converts in Spain for the benefit of the royal court and the Roman Catholic Church. So when Martin Luther introduced the Reformation, he thought that the Jews would be thrilled with his new version of Christianity and would join him in an assault on the Roman Catholic Church. But when they didn't follow him, he turned on them in a way that greatly appealed to the German people, and it was his doctrines that provided Hitler with the religious justification for his final solution. Putting aside the horrific events of history, we also need to examine the other side of the coin and ask a fundamental question rooted in God's integrity. Proverbs chapter 12 verse 1 says, "Whoever loves instruction loves knowledge, but he who hates correction is stupid." Chapter 15 verse 32 says, "He who disdains instruction despises his own soul, but he who heeds rebuke gets understanding." The book of Deuteronomy chapter 28 lays down the covenant curses for disobedience to God. So the Jew also needs to ask, if Israel had truly been obedient to God as a nation and Torah observant through the centuries, then why did these atrocities occur to them? And why didn't Israel experience the divine favor and protection of God as laid out in the covenant blessings? Because God does not lie. Yes, there is always a righteous remnant that suffers when the nation sins, but we are not talking about a remnant here, but horrendous things on a national level. And putting all the ignorance and foolishness of the church of the other centuries aside, if Jews were right in rejecting Yeshua in the first century, then why was the temple destroyed? Why was Jerusalem sacked? Why were so many Jews killed? And why were many scattered from Jerusalem into exile?